Juletane by Myriam. Warner Vieyra. Saturday, August the 26th, 1961. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I am back with my diary. Since morning I feel calm and serene, even a little happy. Writing does me good. I think, for once, I have something to keep me occupied. I offered to help Howard pick the rice. I hummed and laughed with diary. I teased Helene. I haven't seen Vieyra all morning. The weather is relatively fine after the stormy night we had. Lightning struck a suburb nearby. A neighbor told our Mamadou is going to the match. I hear his old 203 missing. He always has trouble starting it. If he had not married Vieyra 2 years ago, he could have bought a new car. She costs him a fortune. Bubbles, jewels, movies, nightclubs, not to mention the money she generously dispenses at baptisms, marriages and all sorts of gatherings. Her lifestyle is no secret to anyone. I hear all these things on days when she sits in the courtyard under my window with her friends. Nevertheless, there are extenuating circumstances. They don't know how much their husbands earn, and Vieyra behaves as if Mamadou were the director of the bank. Mamadou spends his salary at least a month in advance, in order to keep up the appearance of a grand seigneur. Look, here they come, preceded by the little servant girl who is barely 15, and who slaves under Vieyra's strict supervision for less than 3,000 francs per month. She is struggling bravely under the weight of an armchair twice her size. She will have to make 2 more trips, because the 3 Graces, and Vieyra, Binta, and Stu, will not lift a finger to help her. Stu is taller than the other 2, who are however both extraordinarily hefty. She looks as if she is wearing her entire jewelry box. She must be carrying around on her person at least a pound of gold today. Her earrings are so heavy that to keep them on they have to be attached by a black thread tied around her ears, so that the earlobes won't ear. Around her neck she is wearing a huge agate's cross. This cross must be the latest fashion, because all 3 of them are wearing one. On her left wrist she has a watch, gold of course, 7 little gold bangles, 1 for each day of the week, and a bracelet made of gold coins which jingle. Her fat, pudgy fingers are loaded with fancy, filigree rings. On her right arm, a bracelet, a good 10 centimeters thick, in the shape of a mask. Where does all that gold come from? Either jewels bought on credit, borrowed, gifts from their husbands, or, a great deal of them, gifts received in exchange for favors rendered to a wealthy and generous gentleman. In a minute day you will send the little servant girl to buy beer. Then they will gossip maliciously about all the households in the neighborhood, and about the other women they know. There is one thing which astonishes me. These 3 Yankees, ours word for them, are the best of friends. Yet, let one of them leave the others for a moment, and the other 2 don't hesitate to make nasty and barb remarks behind her back. Whenever Binta comes alone, for example, the topic of conversation is often Stu's extravagance towards a certain sheriff, whose beloved and unfaithful 4th wife she means to become. Meanwhile Binta is in search of a permanent liaison since her husband abandoned her for a young wife, a pretty and well-groomed midwife. He hardly comes to see her any more. At the end of the month, he sends her allowance and the usual sack of rice by his chauffeur. Today I don't feel like listening to their litany of calumnies, for I want to keep my good humor. So I am going to take advantage of the opportunity to listen to a record in the drawing room. By some miracle, I had managed to keep a few records of classical music well hidden in the bottom of my wardrobe. and Vieyra does not like this kind of music. I know what would become of my records if they fell into her hands. Music is the one thing which can still move me, make me feel alive again, take me away from the indifference of the world which surrounds me. It is like a breath of fresh air which soothes and uplifts at the same time, which makes me smile or weep. I can't make up my mind between Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and Adagio by Albinoni. I choose the Ninth, because I know that listening to the Adagio, a real hymn of love, will depress me, whereas the final chorus of the Ninth, generally, fills me with hope. For a few moments, I can dream that I am young and beautiful, that the future belongs to me. Sunday, August the 27th, 1961, 7 a.m. Opening my window this morning, I am greeted by a gloomy, grey sky. The immense sadness mingled with rage which has kept me awake all night is in tune with the weather. As far back as I can remember, I cannot think of any wrongdoing on my part grievous enough to merit this life of expiation. I have made up my mind not to accept my fate as the will of God any longer. I want to overcome it. I will no longer turn the other cheek. I will no longer return good for evil. I will direct my revolt against my enemies. The courtyard is deserted. The mango tree, beautiful and lush, seems to taunt me with the splendor of its foliage, washed clean by the rains. It is the rainy season. I am going to write about the present now. My past is so far away and so uneventful. Up until now, Vieyra was of no interest to me. I disdained her silently. Recently, I feel differently about her, more determined, more strongly. Yesterday I was listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in the drawing room, taking advantage of a time when she is in the yard with her friends, because the drawing room is too hot. As the record reached the last chorus, I turned up the volume to drown out the pachanga that they were listening to on the radio in the yard. Also, I felt a deep desire to lose myself entirely in the music. My eyes closed, I was lost in the hymn of joy, when Vieyra came into the drawing room. Furious, she took off the record, broke it and then slapped my face, yelling about my crazy music. I had never hit anyone. No one had ever struck me, except once when I was 6 or 7. My father slapped me because I had broken my gold chain while I was undressing. The chain had caught on my dress. I felt the same astonishment in the face of this unnecessary outburst of violence. I was too surprised to react. Sat for a long time in my armchair, unable to rouse myself. It was the first time that she had dared to hit me. I took her side, at least partly. She told her, "You did the right thing. She tires our ears with her music, but you did not need to hit her." "Yes, poor, harmless creature, you must not hit her," added Binta. "You will make her spiteful. Just let her show her spite, and I will fix her business once and for all. There will be one less useless mouth to feed." And Vieyra replied, "Right now I have not yet decided on anything definite. But, although I am not inclined to violence, I cannot just accept that slap in the face. If I do not retaliate, Vieyra will quickly make it a habit to hit me whenever she feels like it. Until now she was satisfied to make vague threats. Binta does not know just how right she is. I am going to become more than spiteful, and Vieyra will pay very dearly for the 2 years of insults that I have just been through in her presence without saying a word in reply. That slap in the face was the last drop that made my cup of passivity overflow and transformed my patience into a raging torrent. 3 p.m. I have not eaten, since morning, as I did not want to find myself sitting face to face with my enemies over the midday meal. As soon as the meal was finished, Vieyra hastened to give what was left to 2 young talibs, to ensure that I could not come and eat later, as I sometimes do. The house is calm. It is the sacred hour of the Sunday afternoon siesta. Arwa is dozing on a mat under the mango tree with 2 of the children. Diary must have gone out. I had not written anything for a very long time, and I'm so pleased that I remember some grammatical rules which I'd thought I'd long forgotten. I allow myself to be captivated by the magic of the words. I concentrate on forming my letters. Still, it is a very strange idea which I've had these last few days, to write the story of my life. But it is one way to keep myself occupied, and perhaps it is good therapy for my anxieties. Already I feel more secure. I am sure there are things about the past which escape me. It is such a long time since I've been silent, indifferent to people and to things. Today my only certainty is having come to life again. I listen to my heart beating excitedly, and my blood rushing through my veins. I am painfully aware of a need for tenderness. My young body cries out, perhaps hopes for tomorrow. I waited for Mamadou this morning at about 11 o'clock, when he was laboring over his starter in the car. Vieyra was still lolling about in her room. I had not spoken to him for 2 years. Ndeye broke my Beethoven record, and she boxed me. You can't do anything about the box, but can you buy me another record? You know how important that music is in my life. I delivered my speech in one breath, stealing a glance at him. He looked at me with intensity, astonishment written all over his handsome face. I thought I saw a certain weariness in his eyes. He shook his head, pressed harder on the starter. The motor turned over. Without looking at me this time, he said, I'm really sorry. I haven't got a franc on me. I owe a lot of money. I would rather not hear about your household arguments. Then he drove off. I watched the car as it drove away, and turned right onto the main road. Then I went back to my room, determined to take my revenge. Because, in spite of his debts, yesterday evening, as he did every Saturday, he had taken Vieyra to the cinema, and then to a nightclub. It was probably 4 o'clock this morning when I heard them coming. Arwa never goes out on Saturday. Saturday evenings are specially reserved for Vieyra, the official wife, the only presentable wife, because Arwa is illiterate and not educated in the European sense, and because I am crazy and irresponsible. And yet Vieyra, the favored one, the modern, intellectual woman, is not really very educated beneath her veneer of superficial knowledge. She managed to get the coveted certificate at the end of the primary school by copying from Pinter, her neighbor, so they say. Since then, she picks up all her culture from magazines, and all in picture romances for European shopgirls. Lately she has decided to put her knowledge to the service of her country by looking for a job as a secretary typist in a government office. She is learning to type on an ancient machine, a legacy from the former colonial power, kept back from an inventory and given to her as a long-term loan by a gentleman who had also promised her a job in his office. At the moment the passages she is typing have as many mistakes as words. I hope they will hire her without giving her a test first, for that would be detrimental. As I am thinking of the lady, here she comes. Her pan knotted around her, her towel over her shoulder. Madam is going to perform her ablutions, then dressed like a queen, she will accompany Mamadou on a visit to one of their friends. unless there is a baptism, for she never misses one. I wonder if she is really invited to all these gatherings. Sometimes by chance a friend comes by in the morning and tells her, "So-and-so is having a baptism today," and immediately she drapes herself in one of her enormous ceremonial barbas and goes off with her friend, even if she had something else planned for that day. How could Mamadou have taken a woman like that under his roof? I look at Awa, sitting in the yard. She has taken off her head tie to retie it. Her gestures are graceful. Her hair is braided in the shape of a pineapple towards the top of her head, and adorned with 2 charms. Several little gold rings hang from her ears. She has fine regular features, healthy, black skin which has never been exposed to cheap creams and powders, hands with fine tapered fingers. On the ring finger of her left hand she wears a simple band of plated copper. She is well proportioned, fairly tall. She is beautiful without artifice. I have never felt the least resentment towards Awa. I can't understand why she approved of Ndeya's attitude yesterday. Normally she does not interfere in quarrels which don't concern her. Diary has just come in with 2 school friends. They seem particularly exuberant. I think they are coming back from the cinema. It must have been an Indian film. One of the girls demonstrates a dance for Awa. All 3 are talking at once, trying to tell the story, or at least what they understood of it. Diary has brought peanuts for her brothers. She always brings them something when she goes out. Mamadou and Ndeya, richly bedecked, cross the courtyard. They go out without a glance in my direction, greeting Awa as they go. The sun goes off towards other mornings. I put down notebook and pencil until tomorrow, and close my window before the mosquitoes come. Monday, August the 28th, 1961. After a relatively sleepless night, I was awakened before dawn by a veritable howling which tore me from the nightmare in which I was struggling. In my dream 4 masked men, with naked hairy bodies, grinning and taunting me in a language I didn't understand, were pulling my arms and legs. Between each cry I heard the voice of the muezzin calling the faithful to the Fajr morning prayer. Soon I recognized Awa's voice, Mamadou's hurried steps and Ndeya's running as they crossed the drawing room and went towards Awa's room, which was next to mine. I got up and opened my window. The leafy branches of the mango tree shone with particular brilliance against the pearly grey of the early dawn. I left my room and went to see what was happening. Awa came out, tearing her hair, rolling on the ground, and Ndeya trying to hold her up, to calm her. When I got to Awa's room, saw the 3 children. Diary huddled up against the wall, Aulimata with his back to his sister in the same bed, his eyes open, lifeless. Alian, lying on his back, legs apart and his arms folded. His face was a beautiful smiling mask. Nose pinched, thin-lipped, his mouth slightly open. Mamadou seemed to have aged 10 years. He did not even look up when I entered. I put my hand on his shoulder in a gesture of affection. He took hold of it and, squeezing my fingers, thanked me. I went back to my room and locked myself in. Hidden behind my shutters, I could watch what was happening through the openings. The nearest neighbors were the first to arrive. Then the courtyard was quickly invaded by curious passers-by, in search of news to fill their conversations. The uncles and aunts from 33rd Street arrived very soon. A horse-drawn carriage brought about 50 chairs, which were set around the courtyard, under my window as well. The crowd overflowed through the open gate onto the sidewalk. A fire brigade ambulance took away the bodies. About midday they served great bowls of rice. Those who had not gone home were chatting away as happily as at a baptism. Numerous theories were advanced as to what had caused the children's sudden death. They spoke of worms which suffocate children as they sleep, of the unk which contaminates food and causes poisoning, of powder which curdles the milk, of the neighbor's evil eye, and even of the co-wife, in this case Ndaya, since I did not count. Some people, happy at meeting an old friend, were talking about something quite different, inquiring about relatives and friends, talking about work, commenting on the difficulties of modern life. About 3 o'clock the men set off for the burial. The women told their beads, or spoke to each other in low voices. A man monotonously chanted verses from the Quran. Awa, on a mat under the mango tree, surrounded by the women in the family, had a permanent look of astonishment on her face. From time to time a tear would well up in her beautiful eyes which seemed bigger than ever. At last the men came back from the cemetery. They brought the 3 pans which had covered the children's bodies. Then Awa broke into a long wailing which made me shudder. In spite of everything I understood her sorrow, I, who had not seen my child born, I, who would never give birth to a child, a barren tree, forgotten by everyone, whose solitude not a single soul came to trouble that day. It is getting darker, I cannot write any more. Such is life. One day the breath of life takes flight on the wings of a gentle breeze, in the dawn of a quiet morning, and no one can foresee this end. If one day man unravels this mystery he will be like God, and our world will have no more reason to exist. We need this permanently threatening us, to remind us that beyond man there exists an absolute power. Rich, poor, great and small, we are all condemned men and women, temporarily reprieved. Until tomorrow then, and perhaps a new reprieve. The annoying squeak of the record player forced Helene to get up to change the record. She put on Beethoven's Ninth in memory of this young woman who had come to suffer on African soil an exile more horrible than that she had known in Europe. The strange death of the children remained a mystery to her. She had read the news item in the local daily papers which she had delivered to her Paris address in the holidays. One often heard about the sudden deaths of children, which could be explained by malnutrition and inadequate hygiene which caused the slightest infection to be fatal. But 3 from the same family, and at the same time, a few days before, Helene had brought to the hospital the body of a little boy who, according to his mother, had been playing normally the day before. The mother, seeing that he had a high fever, and that his eyes were staring, brought him to the clinic. As she considered his condition to be serious, the midwife who had examined him had asked Helene to go with the sick boy to the hospital. Before they reached the hospital, the child died, without anyone being able to determine the cause of death. He was buried a few hours later. The family had not sought to find out what had caused his death. It was the will of Allah. Allah had taken him. The natural or supernatural causes of the death mattered little as a result. Helene had forgotten the diagnosis put forward. She always had a feeling of powerless rebellion when a child died in her care. In spite of almost 20 years in her profession, she could not really get used to the suffering of others. The whiskey, the cigarettes, the wild parties were a way of arming herself against pig, of doing her work without exposing her own feelings of compassion. Had she begun reading this diary at an opportune moment? She felt in some confused way that reading it was going to change her life. She was at an important crossroads. For the first time for years, she had, of her own accord, stopped rushing around, trying to gain time, just to read a true story, to reflect, to look back, to question her usual attitude. And she was discovering that her life was very empty. She had deliberately closed her heart to love, to compassion, for fear of the suffering it might bring her, and as a result she was living a marginal existence. When she had met Osman, guessing how shy he was, she had decided to seduce him to amuse herself. Jacques had given a Christmas party at his place. Among the usual crowd, heavy drinkers and carousers, Osman stood out, the only one drinking Coca-Cola. Jacques responded to Helene's amazement by introducing her to Osman. She had taken his arm forcibly to make him dance with her. She had so rubbed herself against him that at the end of the piece, Osman was ready to pounce on her. She kept him breathless for the whole evening, and then at dawn she disappeared. She was not very far away. She was in Jacques' bed. Osman, who thought she had left, asked for her address and rushed round to her house. When she got home, 2 or 3 hours later, she found him outside her door. She let him in, made him have a shower, and then put him to bed. Osman's behavior towards Helene was like that of a good little boy. He had not even tried to kiss her. Since she wanted him to go to sleep, he closed his eyes, and, tired from his sleepless night, he fell asleep. Helene worked on some files which she always brought home, then went to join him. As she pulled aside the screen which hid the bed, he woke up. "I'm sorry, I didn't really mean to fall asleep." She looked at him like someone about to consume a tasty morsel. He felt paralyzed by the way she looked at him. He had never met such a fascinating woman. She slowly untied the knot which held her negligee, which spread out around her like an enchantment. She replied in a deep voice which was no more than a whisper. "Don't say you are sorry." Osman told himself that he should do something. Get up, take her in his arms, kiss her. Still he remained stock still, rooted to the bed, all his muscles tense and aching. She took an eternity to cross the 2 meters which separated them. In short, she took all the initiatives. When he left her, his mind was made up. This woman had left his brain in a whirl, and he had to have her, so he would marry her. He asked Jacques about her. She was single and unattached. 2 days later, he asked her for her hand, which made her laugh until tears ran down her cheeks. She thought him weird, charming. She told him that, if she had wanted to get married, she had already had dozens of opportunities. Then he answered tenderly, "Why you need one thing more to be really fulfilled as a woman. I can give you this one little thing. A child who will give your life a purpose." "You really think so?" She stopped laughing. He had touched a chord in her, deeper than he could have imagined. For some time Helene had felt the desire to have a child of her own. She had already thought of taking one of her many nieces or nephews to live with her, but this solution did not fully satisfy her. After thinking about it for a few days, she decided to marry Osman. Physically, she was attracted to him, and he was gentle by nature. She was sure to dominate him, so she was not taking a big risk. At the first sign of trouble, she would ask for a divorce. This way out would always be there. Helene's throat was dry from smoking. She knew she had drunk and smoked enough, and that she should go to bed. Nevertheless, she decided to read the whole notebook through to the very end. She took another mouthful of scotch, closed her eyes to be swallowed up as well in the final chorus of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. She had never before listened to it with such pleasure. She could understand just how comforting the hymn to joy could be to this young woman, alone in a world which she scarcely understood. Helene felt herself carried away like a straw in the wind. Her whole being vibrated. When the record ended, she turned off the record player and began to read.